In our last episode, we discussed how a well-meaning agent went rogue and misread the user's intent and thereby its mandate. So today we want to dive deeper into infrastructure, into security, and most of all into trust, and how trust shifts from the credential layer to the intelligence layer. This is episode 2 of the Agentic Commerce Economy. I'm Rupert, co-chair of the AI Expert Group at Mobey Forum, and I'm joined by Amir, as well co-chair of the AI Expert Group.
Hi everyone.
And today we're going to interview André Schmidt from Accenture. André, great to have you here today. You are a data and AI security lead at Accenture for Central Eastern Europe. Sounds like an amazing role. And in today's world, with agentic AI and agentic commerce popping up, getting more and more important actually. Can we actually trust an AI agent? When we think about trust and we think about agentic commerce, there comes the topic of payments up, right? And in traditional payments, when we thought about security, we usually thought about credential theft. So my first question to you would actually be, how does that security approach and the security perspective in agentic commerce shifts now?
So first and foremost, many thanks for having me, Rupert and Amir. Very, very honored to be here and talk to you today about this. So for your first question, yes, that's a fundamental shift. The card represent actually the credentials. And we used to be able to protect the card. Saying the card not being present is basically defends these credentials. Later on, with the upcoming of the internet and e-commerce as a whole, it became more machine-to-machine type of thing as well. So there, it was all about defending the cryptographic keys for authorization and authentication. But now this is all changing. So in agentic commerce, we are actually defending the delegated intent. So me delegating an agent to be able to conduct a payment for me out of its own decision. And this is what also modern protocols like the AP2 protocol, for example, focuses on.
You mentioned card not present, machine to machine, and AP2. Can you go a bit more into the detail? What does AP2 security really defends?
The threat is no longer, hey, someone stole your card or you lost your card. You call your card issuer and you block your card. It's no longer that, right? The threat now is you gave authority to an AI system, and that authority was either misused, it might also have been misunderstood, or it might have been manipulated. So it's a completely different security problem to solve. And so that's why AP2 doesn't defend your credential or device per se. It defends the cryptographic statement that is baked into the intent. We're trying to qualify the intent through cryptography means that is then verifiable by a system.
Can you actually give us a concrete scenario? So we have a merchant website, we have an AI agent, we have a payment. Now, how we are actually, taking now this cryptographic approach and can ensure that there is no malicious intent involved?
It all starts with the agent that is hitting up the payment attempt. The agent needs to be, much like a human, needs to be identified. So a persistent agentic or agent identity is the basis for us to perform any sort of trust-based investigations or trust-based analysis. Then we need the according cryptographic keys to understand that the agent actually has been mandated and has the authority to conduct such a payment. These keys need to be verified, and the according credentials need to be verified. And then on that basis, the payment side or the payment service would score whether the agents can be trusted, and through that it would then execute the payment, and only when all those things have been verified and the trust has been established.
Amir and I, in our previous episode, actually discussed the topic of prompt injection, right? And of a user's intent to do something bad or actually unintended. Can you explain a bit more in detail?
It's a new world for all of us. We used to be hackers and try to find doorways or backdoors into systems that we would then exploit. There is a whole industry, obviously, built up on this. This world has drastically changed. So we're no longer hacking the system. We're actually convincing the system. That is what prompt injection is all about. So it can go along the lines of me trying to convince the agent that I'm actually another agent or an orchestrator and giving it specific instructions like that. It could be that and also convincing it to ignore its guardrails and constraints that have been baked in. It could also be that I try to convince the agent to behave in a slightest different way. So in the sense of round up, for example, certain numbers, or adds things on top to its scope. It could also be that I change the urgency of the task at hand. Those are all things that will change the way that the agent will behave. And if we put that into a commerce or e-commerce context, this can start to become actually lethal in terms of the e-commerce transaction, because the agent will act, and with that act, it can cause serious damage.
What I heard from you now was a lot about the intent, right? The formulation and making sure that this intent is safeguarded, let's say, and secure. Amir and I last time a bit touched the topic of MCP. Now, MCP is actually something external, right? It's coming in to enrich a certain execution of a topic with additional data that is not at hand of the user. An agent having an intent from my side, going off to the internet and operating on my behalf. How can we actually be secure and ensure that, there is not any data interfered into this intent that actually could create now an originally very safeguarded description that leads to a discovery that then is somehow fraudulent or frauded, so to speak?
The model context protocol, I tend to think of it as a hallway. In a building, a hallway, long corridor with many doors left and right. And MCP will allow you to open a door based on your intent and the trust it has in you as an agent, so to speak. So it's very powerful because what MCP in the end does, it connects the agent to the tools and to the data. And every connection is therefore a trust boundary that needs to be established first. It's not about intent so much as about capability and providing the access. And then it would be the AP2, for example, as a protocol attached to MCP that would ensure the authority and the payment intent. It's very important to isolate those parameters. So capability and access that MCP gives you, the access to this wide agentic system that you might have, completely separated then from protocols like AP2 that then really focuses on the authority, authenticity of your request and the payment intent.
If you consider the MCP as this kind of a access doorway to merchant systems, let's say, so is there any scenario where the merchant could kind of compromise with the machine readable data the initial intent? So I'm kind of trying to get back to connect to prompt injection. So what's behind the door? And is there any scenario where you could have some type of security infringement there?
I mean, it's an excellent question, and I'll try to stumble through the answer here. Those attacks are becoming, it's still, I would say, something that we're finding out how these systems are being attacked. An attack could be like this, that the agent is browsing and ingesting external content. It might be the prompt given by the human user, and browses basic through the different hallway, let's say, trying to find the way to execute the payment that it needs to. Here's already the first step that an attacker would do. So it would try to maliciously change the intent of the agent, either by manipulating the system prompt or maybe some manipulation of the model, what happened before. Then I think the agent would try to legitimize the context when it accesses the payment protocol. In this sense, the AP2. So we would present a legitimate intent to execute a certain payment, and would act according to the malicious instruction rather than to the human instruction. The next step would be that the agent or the payment would be executed, and only after that the human user would be notified. I think important things to note is such an attack would happen on basis of misplaced trust, not on malware or on exploit. So that's why how to manipulate trust is really a new security domain for us to investigate.
There is also the cart mandate. Would you see the human involvement there? Because there are different scenarios. You could fully automate the cart mandate, or you would require human to react. That could be additional security measure for the customer to prevent this type of attacks.
Yeah, I absolutely think that would help. So in general, when looking at AI security, we have stopped talking about AI, human in the loop. It's not about keeping the human in the loop anymore. It's about putting the human in the lead. So that could mean, in the context of such a cart mandate, that yes, the final authority to execute the payment is actually done by a human. Also, it could be that the final transaction before the bank actually executes it could be verified by a different channel with the human in the back. But no matter how we look at this, I think we need to start thinking more about putting the human in the lead, just keeping them in the loop, because keeping things in the loop is nice, but it doesn't necessarily put the focus and, I would say, the attention on things that could break just enough.
We tend to be lazy, humans.
But do you think human in the lead is something optional or is something mandatory?
I have a strong opinion that it has to be mandatory. Personally, I think it's about finding the right balance. It's not about micromanaging the whole agentic workflow. It's about having an understanding which actions lead through which consequences, and when the consequences matter, that's when the human needs to be in the lead. If it's a critical infrastructure or a critical process in terms of what a bank has to do, I think it's clear when the human needs to be in the lead. For other workflows, it might be not so clear, and here it just helps when designing the workflow, when designing the use case, to think where does the human needs to be in the leads, in decision making or in execution. And but yeah, it's definitely a mandatory thing to do these days and times, especially if you want to make strives into maturing and rolling out payment agents to a more global scale, international scale.
Moving from human in the lead to agent's identity. You already mentioned this in one of your previous answers. So what does it actually take to implement Know Your Agent, and what does verifying an agent's identity mean technically?
The term Know Your Agent is very aptly selected, and it reminds all of us who have worked in the financial industry for years of KYC, or Know Your Client. It's really about that. So there's a lot of parallels there. It's about which agent is this exactly? Who has vouched for this agent? What authority does this agent carry? And what is the timeline or the expiration date of that authority? So it's all those things combined, and it goes even beyond just the identity. Technically, this would mean that the agent would have some sort of agentic identity, very specific to this agent and this agent instance. This identity will also have to be undergo as things that a human also does, like a human that has a certificate presented to an e-commerce website. That thing can be also that certificate can also be revoked. So revocation is a key thing here. It needs to operate on basis of cryptographic keys. It needs to have verifiable credentials, so we need to be able to operate on those keys. And then there needs to be real-time trust decisions and authorization. So it's what authority do you have right now on whose basis? So all those things combined will give you KYA.
The whole industry is now moving to digital identity for humans, and in the same breath, we are already talking about agents' digital passport, no? So who issues those and who maintains the registry?
To be honest, that goes right now beyond my knowledge, my most recent knowledge of DIDs or digital identities for agent. But I would think them as certificates, like a certificate authority that you would use as a human or as a website. They will also carry registries. These registries could be centralized or they could be decentralized. The identities would also follow through revocation, as I said before. I think that's an important part. And then the other thing is it's important that the revocation happens instantly, as we operate in milliseconds typically. So if an agent is compromised mid-delegation, let's say by the time an agent starts the payment instruction or the payment procedure, until the bank verifies it, if the agent identity might be revoked during that time, and so the authority must be revoked immediately for the agent to make the payment. What can't happen is that we say we're going to wait until there is a next login, as it's typically with human, and then we're going to revoke your access. So those would not be the ideal procedures or schemes to implement DIDs and revocation.
Is this KYA ecosystem already live and running? Any implementations?
We're early, but it's no longer theoretical. We have been talking about KYA and DIDs in some shape or form for a long time now, so for months now. But it's no longer it's live, yeah. So it's no longer theoretical. There are certain tools that already use them, and I've implemented them, like Agentic e-commerce websites. I think one example is Skyfire. They have implemented this. I think what doesn't exist right now is really an industry standard with regulatory alignment, and I think that's why it's no longer. That's why it's not really a wide scale thing that we're doing KYA, but I think we're getting there.
You said we've been talking about that for a long time already. Few months. That shows a bit, the speed how this whole ecosystem is evolving. If a long time equals few months.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult to keep up with everything that's happening. It's multidimensional, moving almost at light speed. It's good that it's moving forward, but at the same time, are we really covering all the corners? Are the banks up for this?
And André, I'm a banker, maybe not a traditional with a suit and a tie, but I'm still a banker. So yeah, what does it take for us to get ready for it? What if, an agent shows up on our website, an agent somehow shows up within our application, right? What does the agent request? What does the agent actually deliver as a message? And how do I as a bank today actually react? How can I check, is this agent acting reliably on behalf of a user? Walk me through a bit.
The way that I would imagine that this can happen or has been implemented before, the agent would show up and it would present certain things. So again, I tend always to take this parallel to a human walking into a bank and going to the teller and presenting certain things to execute a certain transaction. The first thing the bank would do is, much like a human, it needs to identify itself. The digital identity of the agent needs to be presented. And it needs to be verifiable. So the bank would have to go and cross-check, much like you would look at the passport, and maybe if it's a biometric passport, scan that, make sure it's authentic. It would do the same thing with an agent. Once we know, okay, we know which agent this is, we know where it's coming from, we need to understand that the mandate it has is actually a valid one. And that's also a bit where human in the lead will come into play. So it would present a digitally signed payment mandate that also can be verified. Then the next thing that would happen is the delegation, so the authority for it to execute this mandate. This also needs to be presented, again, human in the lead. And then finally, it might present other things like additional information. It could be when the instruction was given, how long it's valid. So it could be other things that would just help the bank to make sure that the context under which the agent is operating is a valid one. The bank then itself would just ask itself, hey, is this agent recognizable? And does the transaction fit the intent? Those are the things that the bank would do. I think it's important to say the bank needs to do this in milliseconds. It doesn't have minutes like you would have at a teller in a branch.
You talk about human in the lead. Banks love that concept, right? That there is somewhere a human, giving the final go. So somewhat I would believe actually the bank, there is quite a controversy between milliseconds, real-time execution, but at the same time, especially banks, we love kind of a human in the lead. And that's not in milliseconds. A human cannot react in milliseconds, even if it was right at the present. So kind of how can this failure mode be bridged, right? Like real-time versus banks loving a human in the lead.
If you ask the question, can we even achieve milliseconds, right? The answer is yes, it's clearly possible, but only if all the thinking and all the preparation happens before the transaction. So the human in the lead part needs to happen before the transaction starts. And it could be that we bake in, so when we talk about false positives, false negatives, that we bake in certain things under certain conditions during the transaction. So, for example, that we find out, hey, this is we're now getting a new signal, or this is actually not matching a typical transaction from this banking client. That we then raise a certain suspicion, much like it would happen today when you try to pay a bill and the payee is not recognized. So that's something that could happen. But if we do all the thinking, so if we prepare everything before the transaction starts, the transaction is executed no longer probabilistic, but much more deterministically. And so we can achieve a milliseconds type of scenario here.
What I understand from your answer, André, is that you split the process into some deterministic part where you have to check all the checkboxes, and then I guess there is another part where this whole intention should fit the profile, maybe that is maybe also covered by some type of a fraud prevention model. So do you think the banks already have this type of models in place? Do you think that we have to adapt in this area? Do we have to retrain these models when agents start acting?
I think parts of the model, yes. Most probably parts of the model will have to be retrained. I think what stays the same in the end from a bank's perspective is it will know who is the client trying to execute the transaction, and it will be able to match the transaction size and the urgency to what it knows from this client. And through that, it might identify when a potential fraud is at play. What's changing, though, is this whole delegation, right? So we can't negate the presence of the agent who is there to actually execute or instruct the bank to do a certain transaction. And how that will influence the fraud model will really, I think, depend on the fraud model that banks have put in place. Either it would have to be extended to incorporate this agentic e-commerce or this agentic world, or it would have to be maybe retrained from scratch if the actual instruction giver is of central importance for the fraud model.
So would you say that all the existing components of this fraud prevention system will stay in place how they are? They will just be kind of lightly adapted, or do we need something more in the system now?
Well, I mean, it's my opinion is it will need something more. Because I mean, we need to think about what the results could be of completely agentifying commerce or e-commerce. One of the things that could happen is that it's going to be payments, payment instructions or payment requests much more frequent at odd times because the agent can operate 24/7. Maybe that's what I intend this agent to do. And so it will change my behavior as a human being just by using the agents to do e-commerce and payments. And so the models, they will recognize a whole different André. It will recognize an André that is now operating 24/7 and might want to do different kinds of transactions now of different sizes and different urgencies. And so relearning all that, I think, is going to be important. Now, what I do not think is that this is going to happen from today to tomorrow. So I think we as humans, I would predict that we go in a slow pace into this new world, which we don't know and don't entirely just trust yet.
So we have a long time to prepare ourselves, few months, no?
Well, I was about to say a long time is relative right now. I would say it's months rather than years. Yes, it's a good point.
I mean, André, usually during adoption, user experience plays a huge role. Me as a user, it used to be with decision tree chatbots, and we hated it because the user experience was not great. Suddenly we have LLMs, and the user experience is amazing. Doesn't necessarily have to be always right, but the user feels like this is a great experience, right? Now, I believe, the adoption, usually what we do in regulation, but as well what we do in-house, let's say, when deploying a new technology, usually you're a bit, you're conservative in the beginning, right? You don't try to not overshoot. So when we think now in agentic commerce, I could imagine, during the authorization, during the checks, we have a lot of false positives because we try to rather be, cautious about, the person buying, seemingly eggs at 2 a.m. and rather kind of try to be like, okay, let's take this slow because suddenly there's a transaction around $3,000 and we don't want this to happen. Could you imagine that actually there is a certain tension between, the implementation being a bit cautious, at the same time users needing a great experience and not being too dissatisfied with too many kind of declines of a transaction? And how can we balance this out?
That is really where we might make or break the whole thing to some extent, Rupert. So it's an excellent question. I mean, think about false positives, false negatives like that, right? So a false positive, meaning, I want to execute a transaction. The bank says no because it doesn't trust that the transaction is valid. That will break the promise that agentic commerce has in the first place. So it's bad for agentic commerce in the first place. But if a false negative happens, so I do not want to do this, right? And it happens nonetheless. It completely breaks the trust permanently. And so I think this begs for a balanced approach to try to figure out how do we retain trust, maybe not to 100%, but to 99, or I don't know what the right number is, to be honest with you, but that we retain trust as much as possible, while we allow sufficient freedom for the system to actually go about and also make mistakes and learn from them, I guess, right? But so that this agentic commerce can thrive, we need to give it some room to breathe, and that cannot happen if we demand 100% accuracy rate. This precision, it's not about maximizing security in that sense. I think it's about finding the right balance between precision and security.
We drew up this episode and this series actually around an agent buying eggs and going rogue, where it was just supposed to search for eggs. Now, thinking about the framework as a whole, where in which step of the journey should this agent have been prevented? Actually, the intent was searching something, and it went through much more steps up to authorizing a payment.
I want to say I really love the X story. It's not about fraud per se. It's not about security per se. It's about agency. So the X story tells a story about how agents are asked to do something trivial and they overstep. And this has a lot to do here with the intent. So the intent of the request being given doesn't match the outcome. And I think this is where we described before how a bank would authorize a certain instruction. It goes pretty much into that. So the intent being codified, if you want, into the payment mandate and the delegated authority would prevent this from happening. Because there might be a delegated authority in this case, right? Because I might have delegated the agent to do this before and I forgot about it, but there won't be a signed mandate that could be presented. And so, and even if that would be faked, the metadata, the contextual metadata, so what was the original prompt, for example, from the user, would not match the whole thing. And this could be a ripe example. I mean, if I'm going to buy a dozen of eggs and that would not cost $30, but maybe $3,000, this is something where the bank might say, hey, from a contextual perspective, this is not fitting, and maybe it's time to invoke human in the lead and stop this from happening and contacting the client directly.
So are you undergoing a high protein diet right now, or what's wrong here? Just one question before we move to more this kind of the regulatory part. You mentioned the false negatives and also the necessity to progress with agentic commerce, and different stakeholders are interested in this industry to progress in this direction. So who would bear the costs for false negatives if we are undergoing, if we are doing this trade-off between the utility and then all the risks?
That's a very good question. I have an opinion, right? I must admit I'm not entirely sure where we're going really with this right now, but the opinion that I have goes very much in the same direction as with any other payment service provider. If we are matching or balancing out accuracy with security, would have to be the payment service provider that would have to say, hey, I didn't properly check the necessary inputs to authorize this payment, and so it would probably pick up the costs in this case.
You mentioned regulation. Mm-hmm. The X story happened in the US, technically. Let's bring this to Europe. PSD2, basically it requires that a strong customer authentication, like a human needs to be present. And if an AI agent acts autonomously, basically that doesn't fit actually the model of SCA. How do you, what's your perspective, let's say, on regulation in Europe, and how do we need to move forward in general and from a security perspective?
Yeah, I think from PSD1 to 2, now to 3, I think it was years in the making. If we look at the Financial Data Act, years in the making, I don't think that, we talked about this before, right? The time scale is now shrinking down from thinking in years to thinking in weeks and months. If we look at PSD2, I think it just needs to be extended in a way that the intent can be verifiable, and maybe we need to find some sort of cryptographic means to make sure that this fits into the necessary authentication that PSD2 demands.
We are recording this in end of March of 2026, and this month verifiable intent was launched or introduced by Google and MasterCard. What's your take on that?
Well, my take is that where there is money to be made, our society will try to move into that direction. What I do think is that on a global scale, we're going to be looking towards the industry standards that move the fastest. It might be ISO, it might be NIST, it might be something else, right? And then we'll adapt as we go, because I don't think that there is no way that we can just wait until we have the necessary regulation and security in place before these things hit the consumer market or hit the end user.
We mentioned regulation, and usually in Europe, when it comes down to regulation, the tone is we are over-regulated. The AI Act, right, is one of those kinds where everyone is kind of like a bit unhappy how it's structured so far. And so when we think now about agentic commerce and actually a strong regulatory framework around it, can it actually be a true opportunity this time compared to when we look at the US?
Well, I don't think they were better positioned in terms of speed, speed of development. I think we're much better positioned in this. I mean, we used to be historically better positioned in terms of achieving trust and accuracy, but that had a cost that we were just slower. That's why I would say US industry moved faster. Now, and we kept learning from their mistakes. We are now in a pole position to think about this balance that we described before. So yes, I do think that we have a competitive advantage because we are seeing the developments happening. We're also playing with them. We're also pushing them forward from an agentic AI perspective. And we have this experience of regulating. We also know when we're over-regulating, we have also went into those pitfalls a number of times. So I do think we go faster with that as well. And I mean, if you look at, you mentioned the AI Act, if you look at the number of regulations that we had since this whole journey with AI started and have already been decommissioned, I mean, we're talking here about over 100 regulations that already have been decommissioned. So I think we're doing a much better job at being faster in regulating and finding this balance between achieving security and being accurate and providing the agency as needed. So yeah, bright days ahead, I believe, for Europe.
There is an elephant in the room. I think we should also talk about or just mention China, which is, I think, perfectly positioned to excel in agentic commerce because the majority of the population is already using super apps they have. So I'm sure they will probably be the one that we can learn from, no?
Absolutely. So we should not forget about China. I mean, when the whole OpenAI, I would say Gen AI journey or hype started, China was not really in the picture, but they so quickly created the momentum necessary. And when they came out with DeepSeek and everything around it and the evolution of it, their whole take on commerce, as you say, Amir, is so much more advanced. They're so much more interconnected. So I do believe that we should start to look more to the east, not just to the west, and to learn from both superpowers to understand what is working, what is not working, where are the pitfalls, where are the incidents happening, and try to bake this into our balance within Europe to achieve the best of both worlds. Yeah, absolutely. Great comment.
We're talking about hundreds of regulations being already decommissioned again. What's one thing a bank, a PSP, an issuer should do during the next quarter? Because if I ask you about 12 months, it's already so much will happen. So what should we do? What should our listeners do right now?
What I do recommend to all of my clients that are thinking about agentification of their business is all of us should start to think about agent identity. I think that's just the basis. And so banks should really think about this as well and how they want to verify and what is the level of verification they would require for agent identities. And then the second thing that is, I would say, much more relevant for PSPs and banks would be, we talked about intent. So intent modeling, that is something that I really would focus on. How can I with scientific means, using empirical data or methods, how can can really verify the intent by ensuring that the human is in the lead when it comes to executing a transaction. And I think I would put this to the test sooner than later as well, because I don't think that we can just create a theory around it and then pilot for the next 6 to 12 months, as you say. Rupert, it's light speed right now. I would already try to see whether there's real flows that this can be implemented in. So agentic identity and intent modeling.
You know, the saying, New York is the city that never sleeps. Obviously, our economy needs a consumer that never sleeps. And this is where AI agents come into the play. So do you think we also need security teams that also never sleep in this case?
That's a very clear and very strong yes, absolutely. So I think that the world has changed in terms of how cyber defense has to be built or has to be serviced. I don't think that we can block as much as we need to analyze and verify. I also think that the amount of data that is required to identify a certain attack has increased exponentially over the past year. So even more so now than before, we need to be in a 24/7, 365 mode. So help agents helping the security operations analysts to do their job, I think has become the reality now. That's the new gold standard for banks and any other company really to have today.
That's a great statement, actually, to close out our session for today. We really appreciated having you on our episode. You brought great insights, great ideas, especially around the area, of course, of security. And yeah, just saying thank you a lot for being on the show today.
Thank you so much, Rupert and Amir. Was really, as I said at the beginning, an honor. I really had a lot of fun here too. So yeah, I hope that people will take it away and see security as an enabler for this whole agentic commerce transformation rather than something that will keep them behind. Happy days. Thank you.
See you soon in our AI expert group at Mobey Forum. You're one of the important contributors.
Yeah, looking forward to continue the collaboration with you guys.
Hey, this was a great discussion. Now let's move on from security architecture to the protocols. And who would be the better discussion partner than Google?
You're fully right. And that's why we're going to have Denise Oran from Google in our next episode. She will talk UCP, AP2, and what is the call to action for any listener basically out there. Stay tuned for the Agentic Commerce Economy podcast.